This ornate mansion is the Lopez Casa Grande, which is located in the town of Balayan in the province of Batangas. It is the ancestral house of the affluent Don Sixto Castelo Lopez, a wealthy Filipino-Chinese intellectual who was a lesser-known propagandist, dubbed as Rizal's most active agent and recognized as the first Filipino diplomat to the United States in 1898. Don Sixto was part of the Lopez family, a prominent Filipino mestizo clan that owned vast sugarcane plantations in the province of Batangas. The Lopezes gained political influence for being one of the wealthiest families in the region, known to actively criticize Spanish authority even before the days of the Revolution. Although long past its grand heyday, the house serves as an artifact to the meteoric rise of the Filipinos and how valuable commodities such as sugar led to the emergence of the economic and national identity of the Indio and Sangley. The economic rise of the Filipino can be traced back to the dwindling years of the Spanish Empire. From the 18th to the 19th century onwards, Spanish global prominence would be challenged by various wars that would rattle its hegemony. The Napoleonic Wars and the Latin American Revolution would further cut off access to the valuable riches in the Americas. Centuries of abuse and neglect forced the inhabitants of Latin America to call for independence in the 1800s, further weakening Spain's prowess in the global stage.
To understand the repercussion of the Latin American Revolution in the Philippines, we first need to understand the economic context of the Spanish Empire. For centuries, Spanish had relied on the Galleon trade as the principal economic activity to siphon off the riches of its colonies. During the years 1565 to 1815, the Nao de China, otherwise known as the Manila Galleon, made an annual round trip across the Pacific between Manila, Philippines, and Acapulco in modern Mexico. In this period, these ships provided a vital source of income for Spanish colonies in Manila and were the only line of communication between the Spain and its colony in the Philippines. Manila rose to prominence as one of the greatest ports in the world during the height of galleon trade, acting as a hub for trade between China and Europe. Although Chinese silk was by far the most significant cargo, the galleon was also transit other exotic goods like porcelain, ivory, spices, and a myriad of other exotic goods from China to Mexico in exchange for New World silver. Since almost all Spanish capital was invested in speculating on Chinese goods, the decline of the galleon trade had a detrimental impact on the Philippines' economic growth. The context worsened the following the aftermath of the Latin American Wars of Independence. Spain lost a vital end of its Pacific trade route in Acapulco, Mexico, eventually rendering the galleon trade inept for the empire.
With this, Spanish colonial authorities explored various reforms to keep up with the rapid radical tide and sought intellectual and economic parity. In 1778, the liberal Governor General Jose Vasco y Vargas was assigned to the Philippine Islands and swiftly conducted the Plan General Economico, which sought to enhance the archipelago's agriculture, trade, and industry. The era of the entrepot and shipping was coming to a close, and the Philippines had to adapt as the producer and exporter of commodities. Basco enacted the Economic Society of Friends of the Country in 1781, which was a committee that examined the various resources of the colony. Along with it was exploration of a tobacco monopoly. On this note, the Governor General rewarded landowners who planted high value crops of the time sugar, indigo, coffee, cotton, and other numerous commodities. And in 1785, the private rail Compañía de Filipinas was founded to compete with foreign merchants that had illegally entered Philippine trade. It sought to establish commercial relations with Spain's other colonies and to encourage self-producing agriculture during the declining years of the galleon trade. However, the monopoly was extremely fragile with the presence of foreign vessels in Manila. This eventually led to the Real Company's closure in 1830 when foreign merchants eventually imported commodities directly with the Philippines. From the latter part of the 18th through the most part of the 19th century, various regions have specialized in cultivating their own respective crops for Spanish export. In the Ilocos region, indigo and tobacco were the most prized commodities. The Central Plain experienced a boom in rice production. Bicol was the chief exporter of copra and tabaca. Meanwhile, coffee was produced exponentially in the province of Batangas. However, the most prized crop export in the East Indies was sugar, harvested in Pampanga, Iloilo, Negros, and Batangas. With this, Spain subsidized the international shipping of agricultural exports, recording a quote-unquote salutary rise in the level of foreign trade in the colony. For context, the indigo industry, which had started from scratch during the tenure of Governor General Basco, had an exponential rise in exports. In 1786, the archipelago was exporting 14,000 kilos of indigo, and by 1788, the amount had doubled to 28,000. However, sugar remained the prime commodity of the colony. In the 1780s, it was recorded that 1,814 tons of sugar were shipped abroad. This value quadrupled to a staggering 7,256 tons in the 1840s. With this, the first few decades of the 19th century saw export profits jump from half a million pesos to 2,674,220 pesos, with the population doubling as a result of the radical change into an export economy.
From being an entrepot economy during the galleon trade era, where we solely transported things from other nations, the rapid shift to the cash crop economy have resulted in the colony as both manufacturer and exporter of vital commodities. It is in this era that large haciendas were conceived and are still intact today. Town church facades elevated as a symbol of a town's development and prosperity. In one account from Joaquin, the wealthy people of Batangas were recorded to wash their hands in gold basins and were known to wear diamond-studded golden sandals. The females of Santa Cruz, Manila were adorned in diamonds every time they marched in their patroness's October procession. And even Spaniards were marrying Philippine heiresses. Through his works, Rizal painted a social scenario in which Maria Clara and her mother were betrothed to Peninsulares, and Simon corrupted the society with the allure of precious stones. The Philippines became the fabled Indies that the conquistadors sought. The Indios and Creoles flourished as the economy boomed, proving themselves deserving of governmental legitimacy. As riches was poured into the Indios' hands, he rose through the ranks to become a señor, an ilustrado, or an educated middle-class man on par with the Spaniard. The Spaniards, on the other hand, would assert that the Indios were inferior to them. It is on this context that the emergence of national consciousness and the propaganda movement followed later by the end of the century. Many people erroneously presume that poverty was at the roots of the Philippine national consciousness, but economic facts show otherwise. It would have been more compelling if the regions who suffered the most during the epoch, such as Samar and Leyte, had initiated the cry for revolution. But the propaganda emanated from the prosperous regions, the Katagalugan and the Kapampangan. Why would the wealthy Indio and Mestizo become inferior if he had the capability to wield equal power against his Western colonizers? As the economy of the Philippine Islands boomed, Spain increasingly displayed its reliance on Philippine soil. It is in this milieu that the propaganda movement was born, during the time where the Indio had finally enjoyed the same opportunities as his white masters. This rapid swell of the India's fortunes, along with his privileged education, would infuriate the Spanish clergy more than ever. Ironically, Spain's course of discipline during the Cavite Mutiny and the execution of Tagumburza would be the trigger that would light the propaganda movement's battle for equal rights. The upper-class Rizal would never bow down to a small-town Spanish friar. The Luna brothers would never have made it to Europe if it were not for the prospects brought by their father's tobacco business. The same can be said about the radical Lopezes who enjoyed the wealth brought by their clan's various sugar haciendas. It is in this economic context that the Indio had finally awoken to national consciousness, an ideology that would continue to resonate into the 20th century. The elite's defiance would soon trickle down to the lower classes, inspiring revolution and igniting the fuse that would eventually signal the end of Spain's 300-year regime.